Have you ever trusted someone so completely? For so long that when the truth finally came, you didn't cry? You just went very, very still? That's what happened to me. And I was 63 years old when it did. My name is Loretta Haynes. I live in a pale yellow house on Clover Street in Decatur, Georgia. The same house my husband Edmund and I bought 38 years ago when the neighborhood still had dirt roads and neighbors who brought casseroles when somebody got sick. I raised 2 children in that house. I planted the rose bushes along the front fence. I painted the kitchen 3 times trying to find the right shade of cream. I thought I knew every corner of that house. I thought I knew every corner of my husband. I was wrong about both. Edmund Haynes and I met at a church picnic in 1984. He was 27, recently moved to Atlanta from Savannah, working in insurance. He had a laugh that started slow and then took over his whole face, and he smelled like cedar soap. And when he asked if he could carry my potato salad to the table, I thought, well, this one's got manners at least. We were married 11 months later. Our daughter Renee was born the year after, and our son Curtis 3 years after that. For most of our marriage, Edmund handled the money. That was the arrangement we fell into, not one we ever really discussed. He was good with numbers. Or so I believed. And I was the one who kept the household running, raised the children, worked part-time at the school library for 20 years, until my knees told me it was time to stop. When I stopped working, Edmund said, "Don't worry about it, Loretta. I've got us covered." And I believed him, because he was my husband, because we had been married for 32 years by then, because I had no reason not to. That was the mistake I didn't know I was making. I want to tell you exactly how I found out, because I've replayed it so many times that I could describe the light in the room, the sound of the refrigerator humming, the way my reading glasses were sitting on top of my head when everything changed. It was a Tuesday in October. Edmund was at a conference in Charlotte, or so he said, and I was home alone doing what I usually did, puttering around, watering the plants, watching a little television. Around 2 in the afternoon, I went into the study to look for our car insurance documents. We'd had a small fender bender in the parking lot of the Kroger, and I needed the policy number. Edmund kept the important papers in a fireproof box on the bottom shelf of the study closet, behind a row of old tax binders. I'd been in that closet 100 times. I knew where everything was. Or I thought I did. But that day I noticed something I had never noticed before. Behind the tax binders, behind the fireproof box, pushed all the way to the back wall, there was a second box. A dark gray lockbox, the kind with a combination dial. Small enough to hide. Heavy enough that when I pulled it out I needed both hands. I stood there looking at it for a long time. I told myself it was nothing, investment documents maybe. Something he was managing for a client. Edmund had always private about business matters, and I had always respected that. Or I had always let it go, which I suppose isn't the same thing. But I couldn't put it back. Something in me, some quiet animal part of me that had been paying attention even when I wasn't, would not let me put it back. I didn't know the combination. I tried our anniversary. I tried Renee's birthday. I tried Curtis's birthday. I tried Edmund's mother's birth year. None of them worked. I sat down on the closet floor with the box in my lap, and I just looked at it. Then I called my daughter. Renee is 40 years old, and she has her father's stubbornness and my common sense, which is a combination that makes her very good in a crisis. I told her what I'd found, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mama, don't put it back, I'm coming over." She arrived in 40 minutes. She tried a few more combinations, her grandmother's anniversary, the year Edmund graduated college. Nothing. Then she went online on her phone and found a locksmith who could come the same day. 2 hours later, the box was open. What was inside did not look like much at first. A small notebook, a stack of documents, a folded piece of paper held together with a rubber band, and underneath all of that, 3 envelopes, the kind you get from a bank, each one sealed. Renee picked up the notebook first. She opened it and read for a moment, and then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not shock, something quieter than both of those, something like grief. "Mama," she said, "sit down." I was already sitting. The notebook was a handwritten ledger. Edmund's handwriting. I would know it anywhere, those careful block letters he'd had since high school. Dates going back 6 years, amounts. account numbers, withdrawals. He had been moving money, not all at once, nothing dramatic enough to trigger an alert. Small amounts, methodical, regular. 2,000 here, 1,500 there, sometimes less. Over 6 years it added up to something close to $200,000. The money had been going somewhere, the documents showed where. A property in Savannah, his hometown, purchased 4 years ago. A modest house on the marsh, not far from where he'd grown up. I had never seen it, I had never been told it existed. And the folded piece of paper, the one held together with a rubber band. It was a deed, in Edmund's name. And in the name of a woman I had never heard of. Her name was Miriam Ashford. I said the name out loud, and it didn't mean anything to me. It was just a name. But Renee, who is more resourceful than I sometimes give her credit for, typed the name into her phone. And what came up? A Facebook page, mostly private, but with a profile photo visible, was a woman around my age, maybe a few years younger, silver hair, standing on what looked like a marsh dock, smiling at whoever was taking the photo. I recognized the dock. It was Edmund's parents' old property. He had taken me there once, when we were first married, to show me where he'd grown up. The 3 bank envelopes were each stuffed with cash. I don't know how long Renee and I sat there. At some point she made tea, and I didn't drink it, and at some point it got dark outside. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember the tea going cold. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I did not cry. I went very, very still. Edmund called at 7 that evening, the way he always did when he was traveling. "How are you doing, sweetheart? Everything okay?" The same question he had asked me for 38 years. And I said, "Fine, Edmund. Everything's fine. How's the conference?" And he said it was going well, and we talked for 8 minutes and said goodnight. After I hung up, Renee looked at me. "Mama, what are you going to do?" I told her I didn't know yet, but I did know one thing. I was not going to do anything until I was ready. Edmund had taken 6 years to build what he had built. I was not going to dismantle it in one night while I was still in shock. "Don't say anything to your brother yet," I told her. Not yet. She didn't like it, but she listened. That night, after Renee went home, I put everything back in the gray lockbox. I put the lockbox back where I'd found it, behind the tax binders, at the back of the closet. I went to bed in the bed I had shared with Edmund Haynes for 38 years, and I lay there on my side of the mattress, and I thought, very clearly and very calmly, about what I needed to do next. The first thing I did was find a lawyer. I didn't want to use anyone Edmund knew, which ruled out most of the people in our social circle. I asked Renee to make some calls. 2 days later, I had an appointment with a woman named Patricia Okafor, a family attorney in Buckhead with 20 years of experience in divorce and asset recovery. Her office had plants on every surface, and she handed me a glass of water before I had even sat down, and I thought, yes, this is the right person. I told Patricia everything. I brought copies. Renee had photographed every document before we closed the box, and I laid it all out on her desk. The ledger, the property deed, Miriam Ashford's name, the cash in the envelopes. Patricia looked at all of it carefully, and then she folded her hands and looked at me. "Mrs. Haynes," she said, "you've done exactly the right thing coming to me before saying anything to your husband. What you have here is significant. The financial picture alone is enough to work with. The property complicates things, but not in a bad way. It's actually evidence of the pattern." She told me what the process would look like. She told me what I was entitled to. She told me that Edmund's systematic transfers could be characterized as dissipation of marital assets, which had implications for how the division would be calculated. She said the word entitled several times, and each time she said it, something in me sat up a little straighter. I came back to her office 3 times over the next 6 weeks. I learned more about our financial situation in those 6 weeks than I had in 38 years of marriage. Edmund had accounts I didn't know about. He had a pension from a previous employer that he had never mentioned. He had been contributing to a brokerage account in his name only, separate from our joint account, for 12 years. 12 years. I kept going home and cooking dinner. I kept watching television with Edmund in the evenings. I kept saying goodnight. He never seemed to notice anything different about me, which told me something I didn't want to know about how much attention he had been paying. Once about 3 weeks in, he looked up from the newspaper and said, "You seem quiet lately." And I smiled at him and said, "Just tired, honey. My hip's been bothering me." He nodded and went back to his paper. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about any of it. Patricia had the divorce papers prepared in early December. She called to tell me they were ready and asked how I wanted to proceed with service. I could have a process server deliver them. I could have them sent by certified mail. There were options. I thought about it for a day. And then I called Renee. "I know what I want to do," I told her, "but I need your help." Edmund kept the gray lockbox in the study closet, which he considered his private space. He had never actually told me to stay out. He had simply never invited me in. I had access to everything in that house. My name was on the deed, after all. My name was on 38 years of shared living. Renee distracted Edmund on a Saturday afternoon. She called and asked him to help her with something at her house across town. Something about a leaking faucet that had miraculously resolved itself by the time he got there. While he was gone, I went into the study. I took the gray lockbox from the closet. I set it on the desk. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, not this time. I simply placed the divorce papers on top of it. Patricia had printed them on heavy stock, bound with a clip, with a yellow sticky note on the front that said, in my handwriting, "Edmund, we need to talk. Loretta." Then I put the lockbox back exactly where it had been, with the divorce papers on top, and I closed the closet door, and I went to make myself a cup of tea. He found them that evening. I heard him go into the study around 8 o'clock. I was in the living room, reading. I heard the closet open. I heard a long silence. I heard him say something I won't repeat. He came into the living room with the divorce papers in his hand. "Loretta." I looked up from my book. "What is this?" I set the book down. I took off my reading glasses. I looked at my husband of 38 years and I said, "You know what it is, Edmund." He sat down. He didn't try to deny it, not at first. He looked at the papers and then he looked at me, and something in his face, some long-held tension, finally let go. He looked, I thought, almost relieved. Which told me something too. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to do this properly." He started to talk. He tried to explain about Miriam Ashford. He told me it wasn't what it looked like. And then, when I didn't say anything, he told me it was complicated. And then, when I still didn't say anything, he told me he was sorry. He said he'd made a terrible mistake. He said he didn't want to lose me. I listened. I let him talk. And when he was finished, I said, "Edmund, I'm not interested in your explanations tonight. My lawyer's name is on that paperwork. All communication goes through her from here on." He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe this was the version of me he had never bothered to look for. I called Renee that night after Edmund had gone upstairs. I told her it was done. She cried a little, the way she does when she's relieved. Then she asked me how I was feeling. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "Like myself," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like myself." The divorce took 8 months. Patricia was thorough. Edmund's financial maneuvering, all of it documented, all of it photographed, weighed heavily in the proceedings. The property in Savannah, purchased with marital funds, was factored into the settlement. The hidden accounts, the undisclosed pension, the brokerage account. All of it came out. Edmund hired his own attorney, of course. There were difficult weeks. There were conversations I never wanted to have. But it was fair in the end. More than fair, Patricia told me. The kind of settlement that reflected 38 years of contribution. I told Curtis when the proceedings were well underway. He took it the way men sometimes do. Quietly, with a jaw set tight and eyes that went somewhere far away. He was angry at his father. I told him that was allowed, but I also told him that Edmund was still his father, and that whatever happened between Edmund and me was between Edmund and me. He hugged me for a long time in my kitchen, and didn't say anything. That was enough. I've been thinking about what I want to say to you if you're watching this, especially if you're a woman of a certain age, especially if you're in a marriage where someone else handles the money, especially if you've ever thought, well, I trust him, so what does it matter if I know the details? Here's what I know now that I wish I had known 30 years ago. Know where the money is. Not because you don't trust your partner, but because it is your money too. Your name is on that life. You helped build it. You are entitled to understand it. Financial transparency in a marriage isn't suspicion, it's respect. And if your partner responds to curiosity about money with evasion or irritation, pay attention to that. Know what you're worth. I mean that in the practical sense and in the deeper sense. I spent 38 years managing a household, raising children, supporting a career that wasn't mine, and I had somehow convinced myself that didn't count. Patricia Okafor showed me how much it counted. The courts have ways of calculating it that I had never known. You should know too. Know that starting over at 63 is hard and also, I mean this, possible. I won't pretend it's been easy. There are mornings in that pale yellow house on Clover Street when the quiet is too quiet and I miss what I thought I had. But I don't miss Edmund. I miss the marriage I believed in. That's different, and it took me a while to understand the difference, sons. Renee comes over every Sunday for dinner. Curtis calls twice a week. I have started going back to the church choir, which I gave up 20 years ago because Edmund said he preferred a quieter Sunday morning. The choir director said I hadn't lost anything. He said my voice had just been resting. I planted new rose bushes along the front fence this spring. Pink this time. I changed the kitchen to a color that is not cream and is not anything Edmund would have chosen. It is a deep, warm terracotta that makes me happy every time I walk in. I don't know what Miriam Ashford's life looks like now. That's not my story. I have enough of my own to carry. I know that what happened to me happens to women everywhere. Women who trusted, women who stepped back, women who kept the household and the family and the relationships running while someone else controlled the numbers. I know that the shame of it can make you want to stay quiet. I know that 63 feels, some days, like too late to do anything about anything. But it isn't. I promise you it isn't. If you are sitting somewhere right now, wondering if you should look in the closet, look in the closet. If you are wondering if it's too late to call a lawyer, call the lawyer. If you are wondering whether you have the strength to go still and careful and quiet and deliberate when everything in you wants to scream, you do. You do have that strength. You may not know it yet, but you do. I put a sticky note on top of a lockbox and waited in my living room with a book in my lap, and that was the bravest thing I have ever done. My name is Loretta Haynes. I am 63 years old. I am not who I was a year ago. And I am, finally, exactly who I was always supposed to be.